Welcome back. You're watching DD India News Hour. I'm Gautam Roy. Now, China's new restrictions on rare earth exports has rattled the U.S. again. President Donald Trump now says the U.S. is already in a trade war with China, while the Treasury Secretary has called on the allies to work together and diversify. This, even as China and the U.S. prepare for a possible leaders' meeting later this month.
U.S. President Donald Trump said on Wednesday that America is already in a trade war with China, justifying the tariffs as a key tool of national security.
Well, you're in one now. Look, we have 100% tariff. If we didn't have tariffs, we would be exposed as being a nothing. We would have no defense. You know, they've used tariffs on us, but we've never had anybody sitting in that chair that felt the need to do it. And they've allowed us to be $37 trillion in debt, et cetera, et cetera. Tariffs are a very important tool for our defense, for our national security. If we don't have tariffs, we're not going to have national security.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent slammed Beijing's curbs on rare earth exports, calling it China versus the world, warning that U.S. will neither be commanded nor controlled.
This should be a clear sign to our allies that we must work together, and work together we will. And we are not going to let a group of bureaucrats in Beijing try to manage the global supply chains.
Bessent's comments came as world financial leaders gathered in Washington for the IMF and World Bank meetings. He urged partner countries to de-risk and diversify supply chains away from China. Trump is expected to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping later this month in South Korea during the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. But the meeting could be in doubt after Beijing's latest move to restrict rare earth exports. Bureau Report, DD India.
So, where is this headed? Are hard positions being taken just to ensure that when the leaders meet, they can make a big announcement in terms of some sort of a detente on the trade war front? Let's explore what are the possibilities. Ambassador Sanjay Bhattacharya is with us now, and he's a former Secretary of the Ministry of External Affairs. Good afternoon to you, Ambassador. What do you make of how, each passing day we see one statement louder than the other from the US, and China equally loud as well in terms of not just words but also actions? The latest was the port fees and all that are being charged now, taking up prices for everyone, whoever is exporting, importing, especially in packages also. Where do you think this is going in terms of this battle for rare earths?
I think it's been a very deep problem that began with the beginning of the year. We saw the rhetoric on tariffs. There was a temporary understanding which came about in May, which said that they would continue the discussions while they would have this short window where they would kind of keep the levels somewhat low. But now I think it's been ratcheted up again. So I see this as an escalatory practice in which there are retaliatory actions on both sides, actually, because on some of them, US has led the way by imposing very high punitive tariffs, and China has responded by having retaliatory tariffs. The recent Chinese action on rare earths in trying to have a new regulation which will restrict its supply, particularly in certain sectors, particularly in the military sector, is something that is of great concern to many countries in the West, US, of course, primarily, but others have also voiced their concern about this. Germany, the UK have also voiced concern. The fear is that since this is an escalatory process, we find that the port fees have also been increased, have been targeted. So logistics sector is now targeted as the next point. And if this is the classic way in which a trade war goes, the next one would be on currency, because the Chinese have also been accused of having manipulated the currency exchange rate. So if that's the way ahead, these are going to be very uncertain times ahead.
Yes, you mentioned that the Chinese restrictions are not confined to the US, it's not country specific. Even India is to a certain extent bearing the brunt of that, and that has triggered off a race for rare earths as well, apart from so many other races that we've seen in the world, from nuclear weapons to space as well. So where do you think this particular race is headed? Because now Scott Bessent seems to be talking about, getting together with other nations with allied interests to come up with some sort of an alternative supply chain. Is it going in that direction?
Well, the kind of economy that we are all creating for ourselves in this 21st century, which is largely dominated by data analytics and the digital frameworks, requires semiconductors as a very key element.
And batteries.
Into green energy requires EVs, which are requiring certain kinds of critical materials. And so there is this range of critical materials, including the rare earths, which are absolutely essential as you go ahead with the kind of economic plan, the economic infrastructure that you have, and what's going to guide you into the future. So it so happens that about 70% of the supply, and of course, I think there are different views on this as to what the numbers are, but roughly about 70% of the supply is controlled by China, and almost as much as 90% of the reprocessing or the processing of these rare earths is done by China. So in other words, they have a very strong monopolistic presence in this particular area. There have been attempts, as you know, in many of the other fora, within the developed countries, and also some of the fora in which we are engaged with the developed world, whether it is in Quad or it is in our relationship with the Americans directly, or with the European Union, or with the UK. We do have mechanisms in which we try and bring about greater supply chain resilience, particularly of the critical materials. We're also looking at diversifying the source base, and a number of companies are now being established to step up this work. And I think one of the things that Treasury Secretary was talking about was in this particular context, that we need to have more of an economic presence in that particular area. But if you're looking at it tomorrow, we don't have that. This is something that is obviously going to take time, but that is a direction in which the West is going, so that the level of dependence that they have on China and Chinese supplies and its processing facilities will be reduced over a period of time. And of course, what we see is President Trump is saying that he's also going to use the weapon of the tariffs to try and make sure that that doesn't become something like a blackmail that the Chinese can use against them.
Yes, even 500% tariffs have been threatened, and now, of course, today we've heard confirmation from the American end that Donald Trump will be going to Seoul on the 29th and the 30th for this gathering of Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit, where President Xi is also expected, and there's a lot of anticipation building up as to whether there will be a meeting on the sidelines between the two leaders and a way forward which is more amicable than divisive is found. But let's see what happens. We'll know pretty soon. Thanks a lot for joining us for the moment, Ambassador.